David Conroy, and I'm joined today by my colleague Dan Weissman.
Hi, glad you can join us.
We are from NAR's emerging technology team, and we're here today to talk to you about the trends that we are seeing as we wrap up 2019 and headed into 2020. Before we jump into the tech trends, though, I'd like to just quickly introduce myself. Again, my name is David Conroy. I'm the Director of Emerging Technology at NAR. My background is I've spent about 10 years or so in the real estate industry, not as a practitioner, but more on the technology and software developer side. I've been working with state associations and national and local associations during that 10 years. My background is strong with the real estate standards. I've been very involved with the Real Estate Standards Organization. I'm big on open source technology. I'm highly skilled with blockchain and distributed ledger tech, which we'll be talking a little bit about in just a few minutes. And I have strong experience, building teams and management and just networking in general. Dan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Dave. So I am the other Director of Emerging Tech at NAR. I come from a bit of a different background. I come from the commercial construction space. I was a project manager for a number of years and then got into construction technology. And what's so interesting is that the construction tech space and the real estate tech space are on these same trajectories around really focusing on process improvement and the use of technology. So it's really exciting. I really am passionate about figuring out how to improve businesses and driving operational efficiencies through the use of technology. And then really love getting out, kind of boots on the ground, networking and understanding what the real world problems are and how we can help make suggestions on fixing those problems through process and technology improvements.
We are kind of like NAR's 1-2 punch when it comes to emerging technology. With that, let's kind of just jump right in. Dan and I right now, we kind of about 20 or so topics that we are following currently. We're kind of heavily focusing on about 5 or 6 at a time, depending on where we see the trends going and where we determine their level of impact. Today, we'd like to spend the next 45 minutes or so talking about which technologies we think are going to have the largest impact on the industry for 2020 and beyond, as well as the impacts that they may have on your business, and hopefully some things that you can take away from this webinar today that will help improve your business or perhaps keep you safe from some of the things on here. So quick recap, we're going to lead with artificial intelligence, then we'll jump into some applications of AI like AVMs. Then Dan is going to speak to you a little bit about augmented reality, and then I'll wrap us up with a little bit of blockchain and some ransomware talk, and as well as some predictions for next year. So with that, let's just jump right in. So artificial intelligence, machine learning, these days, it's such a broad topic. It's an area of research that's been around for like 40, 50 years maybe. And I'd really like to thank Dr. Alex Volkowski of NAR's research team for helping us with this slide, and also helping kind of just point out of all of the ways in the industry that could be impacted by this technology, just kind of a few in each realm, and then we'll jump into some specific ones that can be used today that I find are pretty interesting. So kind of from the top down, you may not really think about this very often, but AI could really help with just some qualifying leads and matchmaking of leads to agents. Dan is going to be specifically talking about how they could help AVMs, augmenting them. We've all gone to websites before where we've seen chat bots and you're never really sure if they're a real person or a bot. As that technology gets better, realtors will be able to use those type of 24/7 concierge services to help, service their clients without having to be on call, 24/7. From the brokerage point of view, there are the software that they're offering their agents, like their CRMs. The tech AI is really making leaps and really big strides in CRM. I know personally, Dan and I are testing out new CRMs to manage all of the connections that we're making in the industry. Again, it's our job to stay up to date with this tech and make sure we're forming relationships with these companies to make sure we can provide value for members. And the tools that we're using today for CRM, it's amazing what they can do. Just kind of based off just decades old technology with machine learning. There are also products out there that are using AI to enhance recruitment for brokerages. So it's a really kind of exciting time for this technology, and I think 2020 is just going to be a really big year for it. We're using AI at the National Association. This might be surprising to some, but our research team, and especially some of the work that's been done by Dr. Volkowski, has been really focused on some incredible projects using AI and machine learning to do things like predict annual conference attendance, depending on city and depending on markets, right? We're also able to, we have some projects with some other associations where we're analyzing their membership and predicting churn, or what type of things help members stay at associations and renew their dues, which is, without a doubt, kind of the lifeblood of our associations. Then, of course, beyond just kind of like the inside baseball within real estate associations, like the brokers and the agents, even just property owners are using this technology today to help improve their business. Property managers are able to tell when a furnace is going to fail because of the predictive maintenance, or they could save 10, 20, 30% on their energy uses by being able to do predictive analytics on historic data. And if these proper managers, which people are out there these days, now that they're able to do all sorts of predictive marketing analytics, they're able to see potential threats to their business or the occupancy of the buildings that they own. So again, I kind of wanted to start on this slide because AI is kind of broad and there's so many different ways that it can impact. But I didn't want to leave you with kind of just this broad picture. I kind of wanted to jump into a specific use case for real estate that I just find incredibly interesting. And it kind of, I think it's important for the membership to know that AI isn't just for data scientists anymore. And it's no longer like incredibly complicated or even expensive. And there are, all of the big tech companies out there, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, they all have tools that make this very, very easy to use. And you can now use the power of the cloud to solve all of these problems, or help better provide context to the properties you're trying to sell for like fractions of pennies and done in milliseconds. It's pretty amazing. So I've got a couple examples that I'd like to show you. About 4 or 5 different property images that have been augmented or enhanced using the Amazon recognition tool. So these are just property photos. This is just a living room that I found that had the proper licenses for me to be able to reshare it. But so what you're looking at here is, again, the Amazon recognition tool, which for fractions of a penny and within milliseconds, pretty much as fast as the page loads in your browser, it's able to automatically detect things in the image. It could automatically tag these photos with things that your clients might be interested in. So you remember on like the previous slide, I was talking about how realtors could use AI to help manage to matchmake leads to agents. You can actually take it a step further, and you could use AI to kind of match properties with clients. So while this one is kind of just a very basic photo, you can see that it's automatic. It's been able to tell that this is an interior design photo. It's detecting the rooms and the chairs. In some other photos, it can actually do even a much better job. And these numbers here to the side, those are the confidence levels of the AI systems in that, that this is an indoor room that has good interior design and furniture. But say on the next slide, here it's kind of taking it a little step further, right? It's able to detect that there's an island. Again, that's an interior photo, and there's bar stools. Perhaps your client looking for an eat-in kitchen. You could now have these things. Perhaps the person listing this property didn't put that text in the property description. Now, all of a sudden, these listings could be enhanced so much more. And again, it's nearly free. It's crazy to say that, but an MLS could have tens of thousands of these photos, and it would cost them like less than $100 a month to augment their MLSs, or even brokerages could do this. Could augment these photos because of the artificial intelligence as a service that's available today. Again, it's like you don't even need to know how to, train or build models for real estate photos, and you don't need to spend thousands of dollars to do that, and then test data against it. It's all done. It's all out of the box. And again, it couldn't be cheaper. So it's just really interesting how like big companies have leveraged decades of tech research and now kind of just like offer it up, kind of like we all have these voice assistants, in our homes and in our pockets. It's just really kind of cool to see the traditional heavy research tech now become kind of just so easy to use. And it's not just like interior photos, right? You can, almost every photo that has a nice view, every home that has a nice view has a photo of it in their listings. So here it's able to detect that, oh, it's in a metropolis, there's a nice water view, it's downtown, there's nice architecture nearby. And again, all of these are really, really high confidence levels. And it's being loaded in like within a few seconds. I've got like two more that I'd like to show you. This one I thought was really fun, just because it's detecting all sorts of different transportation methods. It's seeing that there's a person on a skateboard in traffic. It's kind of classifying that there's sports going on nearby. It's able to tell that again there's a path and this is downtown. It's just really interesting to see the technology advance in this way to the point where now we can kind of just plug and play it into real estate. I'm surprised actually that I haven't seen it more. So that's why I kind of see this as a 2020 trend. Maybe hopefully this presentation that we're giving here, Dan, will inspire some of these companies to act on some of these tools. So this is the last one that I wanted to talk about for AI. Again, back to kind of a property photo. Perhaps your client is looking for like a nice yard with an outdoor porch, a nice wooden deck. And to be honest, the real reason I included it is because it was 96% chance sure that there was a cat. And I just thought that was really interesting, that while the software is doing all this classification for the property and the yard and the railing and everything, it's also pretty sure that there's a cat there. So that's kind of just one application of artificial intelligence in real estate, but there's many more. So I'd like to actually pass it over to Dan here for a moment, where he's going to kind of talk to you about how this type of AI as a service can like impact more than just things like listing data and photo data, but perhaps something like the AVMs and the comps that you're seeing for your property. Dan?
Thanks, Dave. That was a great lead in to our next topic, which is automated valuation model, so AVM. And so I'm pretty sure most people are familiar with what that term means, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, I just want to define that as it states on the slide. So AVM is a term for a service that uses mathematical modeling combined with a number of different databases to try to determine what existing properties are worth and to calculate that value. And so this is used all across the industry, and we're seeing this more and more. Earlier, Dave and I were talking, and he mentioned a stat that stuck with me, which was that 90% of the data that we have today has been collected in the past 2 years, which is just amazing. So we are just overloaded with data. And by using AVM, there are a number of companies, which I'll get to in a minute, that are taking advantage of this data that's out there to try to come up with what they think values of homes are. So where does this data come from? There's a number of different sources, and some of the big companies that are using AVM, they all have their own proprietary algorithms to determine what the value of what they think the values of the homes are. So they come from the MLS, assessor's office, sales prices, and as the data flows in and they validate the data, it is becoming more and more accurate. There are also companies out there that will collect all this data for you and do their own algorithms and computations to provide data to others within the industry. So anyone can kind of play in the AVM space and get the data that you need to help you with your business. So there are companies like Atom and CoreLogic, and the one that was interesting to me was Freddie Mac. Freddie Mac has been doing this for 20 plus years in one way or another, using this concept of AVM. But with today's computing power, they're just becoming better at it, more efficient, can do it faster, and hopefully be more accurate. I also think it's important to point out that you have your AVM, but that is and can be almost always different than your sales price or your assessment or your appraisal. I actually just got my house appraised, and I went to 3 different sites that all use AVM, and every single site that I looked at had a different value. One of them ended up being within about $3,000 of the appraisal. So I would say that whatever model they have built is providing a more accurate value of my home, where the others were off by $50,000, $60,000. But as we collect more and more of this data, it's will hopefully get more and more accurate. But in order to do that, they need to understand bedrooms, bathroom counts, square footage, yards, and be able to analyze all that data across the different communities and what the benefits are. So next, I want to talk about the different applications. I mentioned some of them, but there's the comps and the CMAs, and I think one of the biggest ones I'm very familiar with is Zestimate. And so I'll talk about an example in a minute. What I would say is that AVMs are what iBuyers are depending on. They use this exclusively, their models, and they all vary a bit based on the data they have and how they want to analyze it and what risks they kind of want to take. But they're using this as a way to quickly give values of homes, which is the concept of this whole instant buyer. Well, more importantly, what I'd like to show you is there's a couple charts that I have on here that I pulled from Zestimate. And what I think is very interesting, the top chart is on market and the bottom chart is off market. And what you will see is I highlighted two numbers just because I thought there was a drastic enough difference to show what the value of this data has. So if you look at the top one, I picked Chicago, which is where we're based out of. And for houses that are on the market, that have data available, that they have collected, the Zestimate 85% of the time is within 5% of the sales price. And so that's pretty impressive. And obviously, as you go up in terms of the percentage within the sale price, their accuracy gets better and better because there's more wiggle room. But what's very interesting is kind of the off the market homes, kind of the pocket listings, ones that aren't necessarily like tons of data out there, they're more like private sales. You can see that the accuracy, because of the lack of data, dropped significantly. So it's 34.3% within 5% of the sales price. And so I think the important thing to point out here is that as we collect more and more data on different homes and neighborhoods, it starts to become amazing how, back to what Dave was talking about with AI and machine learning, is that the computers and the people running these computers get better and better at what they do and can better analyze the data and come up with better analysis around where they think the home values really are. And so we're collecting all this data, and there's so many numbers behind it, and it's very challenging because the real estate business is very client driven. And you need to know the neighborhoods and you need to understand the market. And so how do these algorithms, these automated valuation models take that into account? And a lot of what they're doing as they collect this data is they're also collecting imagery and photos. And that will soon be able to, as Dave was showing with some of the predictions around, or some of the ways to select and figure out, this has granite countertops, this is 2 bedrooms versus 3 bedrooms, be able to take these images and this AI and turn it and tie it into these AVMs so that you get better accuracy. And one way that they're starting to tie all this together is through AR and VR. So as we talk about AR and VR, what I want to do is describe a little bit about how this ties in to everything kind of we've been talking about around predicting things and understanding what is actually happening with it from a price perspective and from a visual perspective within these homes. And so I have it broken down into 3 different buckets. We'll talk about augmented reality, then virtual reality, and then we'll talk a bit about mixed reality, which is a combination of both. And so within this this slide, what you'll see is a couple different images, one of which is actually my son and my nephew, and they were using Snapchat this day. And as you can see, through augmented reality, they're adding digital elements to their real life. Like they're sitting there at somebody's house, and those sunglasses and the money flying in the air is all augmented within the world that they're living. And what's neat about AR is that it's really easy to use. I'm guessing that all of you have a phone sitting next to you or a tablet, and you can simply do that within your phone. And some of most of a lot of the apps that we're using today, you don't even realize, but there are these AR components to it. And then you'll see the other picture is actually me right before my sister's wedding. My son was playing with my phone, and there I am sitting with a bunch of Pikachus from Pokemon. So and that was through Snapchat. It's really cool. But I think more applicable to the real estate industry, you can see on the far right of this slide, a company called Roomy. So you have this open home. Uh, it's really hard for somebody to visualize if I move in there what it's going to look like. It's this big, echoey feeling space. And as you can see, what they did was they augmented the reality. So they took the real pictures, image, and they put in furniture. And so you can vary that based on what your client's needs are, what you think they want, what they do want. And it really helps provide a better visual appearance of how that house may or that space may fit into that person's life. Um,
Yeah, added pillows to the benches and art. Kind of the level of detail here that they're able to pull off.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, and there are some companies out there that will give you kind of standard templates to change that based on if you want a contemporary look or some other one. So it is pretty neat the level of detail and how realistic it looks. I mean, this isn't the biggest image, but if you were to go look at this, it really does feel like it's real furniture. Um, so that's AR. I'd like to talk a little bit about virtual reality. And the difference between AR and VR is AR is augmenting. So it's putting things within a space that you're standing in or you're in. With virtual reality, it's complete immersion into another world, another space. It's a whole nother experience. There are a number of big players within this space, and we're starting to see it take off more and more within the real estate industry. So you have Facebook and Google that are all within this space, and it's pretty amazing what they're doing with the technology. Um, and so if you look at this picture, what you can see is on the far right, there's a company called ImmoViewer. There's also Matterport, and those companies are creating images that you can walk through without actually being there. So if you were to put on one of these headsets, there are a couple different ones that I showed within this slide, you can literally enter that world. And it's just amazing, the clarity. And what's really cool is Google has Google Cardboard, where you actually do use a phone, you put it into this cardboard headset, and it takes you into another world. So, I mean, this is used across the industry in gaming, and a number of different applications, and it's starting to really take off within the real estate industry. I think one of the biggest barriers to entry, other than the Google Cardboard, is the cost of some of these headsets. So it's been a bit challenging because they're not cheap, and the models that sometimes need to get built can be a little bit pricey. But I think that this is going to take off. I think that the expectations around buyers are they're going to want to see 20 places, but they aren't going to want to go to all 20 places. And this is a really cool way of having them enter a home and be able to walk through it, so to speak, without actually having to do it. So the next is when you combine these two things of AR and VR, you have what it can be referred to as mixed reality. So this is like the next generation of AR, and one of the big companies focusing on this is Microsoft. And this is probably a little bit more into the future, but I think is somewhat applicable to homes as well and real estate in general. But right now, where they're really focusing on is really overlaying info and images so that you are in a kind of augmented world, but or a virtual world, but you're also uh, in part of the world doing something. So let me give you an example because it's a bit hard to explain. So if you look at the picture on the right-hand side, this is a mechanic who is building a generator and has the HoloLens from Microsoft on. And as you can see, there are instructions. Is the actual physical piece of equipment in the background, and then there are these virtual levers showing him what to do and when to do it. So it's combining overlays of images and actual instructions on what to do with this physical piece of equipment in this example. This is being heavily used, starting to be heavily used as well across like the medical industry. And I think that it definitely will be applicable as we start to combine um, uh, things like staging, as well as being able to point out and note what type of countertops there might be, what kind of flooring there is, to take this kind of augmented reality and virtual reality and combine the two, and also to be able to put things in that you may want in that home at some point. So it's really cool.
And Dan, correct me if I'm wrong here, but another key differentiator here is he's actually able to interact with these overlays, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm glad you point that out. Is yes, he's interacting with those, so you can see the number 1 and 2 and how he's interacting with those. So it is
Hit next on the instructions, and it would go to the next step.
correct. Yeah. So yeah, it's totally interactive. Um, with all of this said, we just talked about a lot of stuff. We talked a bit about you know AVMs and all the numbers, and now AR and VR and being in the space. And I think one of the themes, hopefully, you picked up on is there is a ton of data, and having this data protected and where it lives is really important from a security perspective. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dave to talk about some of kind of the behind the scenes and what we should be paying attention from a data perspective.
Yeah, so we just so the audience knows, we have two more topics we're going to cover here. The first is blockchain, and then we're going to kind of wrap up a little bit about ransomware and privacy and security, and then kind of hammer it home, talk about the five things we've talked about here today. Really kind of Cliff's Notes version of what it means for your business, and then we'll open up to some Q&A. But before we end the recording, but as Dan mentioned, we have talked about a lot so far, but there are these two more emerging technologies that I really think are important for our members to at least be aware of. And this is one that you may have heard a lot about, but it is a kind of a confusing topic. I mean, to be honest, this is a topic that I've been speaking about for nearly 5 years now, and it's still one of the ones that's more challenging for me to explain. It just evolves so much. I'm still learning new things every day, but I will do my best here to try to explain it in a way that makes sense to the real estate industry. So blockchains, the first question you get is what are blockchains? Simply put, it's just they're systems that record an ever-growing list of records or transactions. Now, these transactions, they could be anything, right? Could be deposits and withdrawals that you make at your local bank, or these could be records that are created when a property is bought or sold or refinanced. And what makes blockchain systems different than those, bank ledgers or title systems is that any records that are added to blockchains are permanent and easily audible by anyone who's involved. And this technology was first used in what I kind of like to call like the blockchain 1.0 era, about 10 years ago, 2009, when Bitcoin was first launched. And that's kind of the first application that used the blockchain technology. So like kind of like your iPhone might have an app on it, but it's underlying that is the iOS system. Bitcoin is like a blockchain application that's built on top of like the operating system that is blockchain. So again, really quickly, I won't spend too much time on blockchains today because it is a very in-depth technical term, but it just, again, the core tenets of what makes it different from a traditional database or a land title system or MLS is, that the records are distributed, meaning anyone who's involved in the transaction has a copy of it. They're immutable, means it's append only, and you can't go back in history to change things. And again, it's verifiable. So you got to be thinking instantly verifiable, and it's using some complex tech behind the scenes to make sure so. So when you kind of think about like, well, what in real estate could benefit from that type of system, hopefully your mind is going to things like title. Personally, I think that's like the number one use case for this tech. Like, it's almost like this technology was purposely built for it. Could you imagine a land titling system where everything, ownership of a property was like indisputable and like instantly verifiable? How that would, change or improve the current today's real estate process? And remember when I said like Bitcoin before was like blockchain 1.0, and that was like 10 years ago. That this technology has improved to now where there's blockchain 2.0 technologies out there that beyond just transferring value like Bitcoin can, there are now these things called smart contracts that will allow for automation of all sorts of parts of of the real estate transaction. Now, when I say smart contracts, that's not necessarily just legal agreements, but instead it's almost like it's really snippets of code is stored in these ledgers of transactions that can automatically trigger actions. So, say you wanted to put in an offer on a property, it could automate the credit check, things like that, without having to wait on the normal 40 or 50 people that are involved in a transaction. So, smart contracts are going to make automating of legal agreements so much more efficient. There might be less middlemen involved. Payments can settle faster with lower fees. There's just so many opportunities for this tech that even though it might not directly impact your business in 2020, it just the potential of it is so high that I feel like we had to include it today. So just two more slides on blockchain. A lot of people are like, they've heard of it now, they've heard of Bitcoin, but they want to know, like, is anyone actually using this? Is this actually going anywhere? Could this thing just, go away? Could it completely flop? There is a chance for all of that, but I'm not so sure because every major tech company, as well as some of the large financial players, are all building with this technology. From JP Morgan's has built technology on top of this. IBM, Ernst and Young, even Facebook. They're trying to do kind of a Bitcoin 2.0 with their product Libra, which is such an ambitious project, a global currency. It's really fascinating work, but I won't get too far in the details here. If you'd like to learn more about that, we have some contact information at the end of this presentation where I'd be happy to talk to you about it more. But one last thing I wanted to mention was that it's not only these major enterprises that are working on it, it's also kind of leveled the playing field for some of the tech companies. And there are hundreds of startups also working with this tech, including two that are part of NAR's Real Estate Accelerator this year, a company called Proppy and RE Consortia, which are both looking at using blockchain to improve the real estate transaction process. And again, one last slide on blockchain. What is NAR's involvement at this point? Besides the investments in a few of the startups that are working with the technology, we're also heavily involved with the Real Estate Standards Organization, so that when standards need to be defined for how this tech should be used, we can have a kind of voice at the table and make recommendations to make sure that this gets implemented in a way that's kind of best for all parties within the industry. I kind of see that as NAR's role as an association at RESO, and of course any companies that are leading the way in this tech. Dan and I have began developing personal relationships. So that's all I've got for blockchain. I'd like to just cover one last topic today for the audience. Again, is part of Dan and I's 2020 tech predictions, and this last one is ransomware. My prediction here is that in 2020, I know this is kind of ominous, but I think there's going to be a major firm or association or MLS is going to be hit with ransomware that will cause, it's going to affect the ability for people to be able to transfer property for weeks at a time. So what is ransomware? It's a type of malware that's designed to deny people access to their own computer systems. You may have even experienced this personally. This is a virus that you'll get on your computer that the only way to get your resources back or get access to your systems and services back is to pay a ransom. This is typically, people typically will get this through phishing attempts or hacking attempts or visiting sites that shouldn't be trusted, and they can be absolutely devastating to individuals or organizations. When this hits a business, the average cost of a breach is $3.86 million. I'd like to give a quick thank you to Chris DeRosa of the NAR Finance Department, who has pulled some of these statistics from the Verizon 2019 Cybersecurity Report, because these numbers are just mind-boggling to me. So there were over 40,000 incidents last year, and 2,000 of them were confirmed by professionals. I thought it was really interesting, the mix of internal and external threats. It's about 60-40, and the breakup of how these attacks were administered, and the fact that like social media is being used more and more to get these ransomware viruses installed on these systems. A few more stats on ransomware. I think that the best thing that I've learned about this year is that it's often not even your systems, right? So say you have a plus tech team, and you're using all secure services by trusted providers. Um, but then there's a third party who might have access to your system for something not core to your business, but perhaps some small auxiliary benefit, like like a healthcare provider or a payroll system. And all of a sudden, because you've trusted them access to your system, you could be hit with malware and ransomware. That not only does it stop your systems from working, but now you're on the hook for a ransom to pay to these hackers to just get access back to your systems. Um, it's something that we've seen happen in other industries, and while it has happened a few times this year in real estate, um, it's just so prevalent that unfortunately, I kind of have to predict that there's going to be a kind of a black swan event in 2020, where this is going to really cause some pain for some companies. So I mentioned before that there was a couple of incidents this year that affected real estate. Uh, the city of Baltimore actually was attacked by a ransomware um, hacker that caused their entire city to shut down for weeks. Right, like you couldn't get assessments, you couldn't get utility bills, you couldn't get permits. Um, it even of course you couldn't transfer property in that case, but it even affected renters because they weren't able to get the materials they needed to be able to even sign a lease. Um, in the title industry, First American Title had a breach last year where they just weren't properly securing applications, and people were able to just iterate over their data, getting information on thousands and thousands of people who had applied for title insurance. Metrolist, that's I believe that's Northern California's their largest MLS. Uh, they were hit with a ransomware attack in June. Now, fortunately, they were only down for about 24 hours, but that was over 20,000 real estate brokers and agents who subscribed to that service who were unable to gain access to their listings during the shutdown. Um, and this last one here, again, is another municipality, which is kind of like a ripe target for these hackers. Lake City, Florida. They were hit with an attack that was so bad that their whole city had to convert back to pen and paper if they wanted to do business. And they ended up paying the hackers $500,000 to gain access back to their systems. So kind of really scary stuff. And this presentation isn't meant to be that, but it is about raising awareness. So we wanted to just mention that because it is definitely a trend we see increasing, and we didn't want to ignore it. And we wanted to also give an opportunity to provide some tips on how you could keep yourself safe. So again, this is a situation you don't want to be reactive to. You definitely want to prevent it if possible. Again, I know a lot of this seems like common sense, but I feel like it has to be reiterated because it still is the main reason how these attacks happen. Is just don't click on unverified links in emails. Make sure your operating systems and your phones are updating automatically. This is kind of a new one that I don't see people doing often, but like if I remember at a conference or a presentation, people are just handing USB drives back and forth and plugging them into their computer like it's no big deal. That is really bad. OPSEC is called, operational security. I would never use USBs in general at this point, if that was my advice. Stay off public Wi-Fi's, hotels,
Hey,
conferences, avoid it at all costs.
just to chime in there, I was reading an article the other day related to kind of the USB concept, and same with even power cords. I was reading that there are companies that are installing things within power cords to then hack in wirelessly to your computers and data. So even things from power cords to your phones also, I think, are applicable to this.
Yeah, that's a great point, Dan, because these days, like a power cord is not simple. Like if you take apart your power supply, there's actually probably a computer in there that's regulating the voltage. Um, this is something that happens in targeted attacks, that hackers who really wanted to get into someone's business or perhaps hurt them, they will just spread USBs in the parking lot, and they'll have like a 20 or 30% hit rate of people picking them up and plugging them into their computers because people think, hey, free thumb drive. So that's just one easy tip. I would avoid that at all costs. Make sure you're using antivirus. And this type of thing, I just wouldn't leave to hobbyists. Like I know everyone out there, especially tech savvy people, kind of think like, "Hey, I'm pretty good at this." But when it comes to like the security of your networks and your business, I always recommend hiring a professional, whether it's full time or consultant. This is a serious business for these hackers now, right? This is like their full-time job is to just take over companies and ruin businesses. So definitely consult with professionals would be my advice. So I know this was a lot. Dan, I think it would be good for us now to kind of just go one by one through all of the technologies that we discussed today and kind of just quickly talk about what it means for the business. Let readers know or listeners know where they could find some more information, and then just open up the floor to questions because we really hit people here with a lot of stuff. Okay, so I believe I did AI. So my kind of key takeaway here is that decades of research and is now available today to startups and enterprises alike. It's affordable, powerful, and you can make an impact today in your business, and soon it's going to be really going to make a large one. Dan, would you like to talk about AVM?
Yeah, sure. So with AVM, again, a lot of data is out there, and as the algorithms behind the scenes get better and better, the level of accuracy for the valuation of homes is going to get better and better. And just being aware that it's happening and that there's lots of data and using it to your advantage to be able to better serve your clients and customers is really critical. So just pay attention to what data is out there, what AVMs are out there, and how you can use them to make sure that you're getting the best value for your client from a seller or buyer perspective. Um, and then with AR, VR, MR, being able to interact in a different world that you're not currently sitting in is critical. I think that more and more buyers are going to want this. I mentioned it earlier around if somebody wants to see 20, 30 homes as a starting point. I think that using AR and VR is going to be the new norm. So make sure that you are paying attention to these reality worlds, that you can make your life easier to provide better services to clients, and just be provide these virtual spaces as a starting point to get an idea of what real estate's out there and what your clients may be looking for.
Kind of moving on here to the fourth topic, blockchain. This is an interesting one because there's no really action items for you today, as this technology is not consumer facing or probably never will be consumer or agent facing. It's more like behind the scenes. But the potential is so large due to the smart contracts and title and payments that this is more just like an educational component we wanted to be aware of. And then the exact opposite end, ransomware and security. This definitely will affect your business today. You have to make sure you're being proactive about it. You have to make sure that you're auditing any third parties that might have access to your networks. And again, consult professionals and perhaps even consider cybersecurity insurance if you've weighed the pros and cons of your business and that makes sense for you.
Dave, I would just add on to the ransomware security, and this sounds maybe a little generic, but just use common sense when you're looking at things on the web or an email. If it's too good to be true, it probably is, and you probably shouldn't click on it, or you should call the person you get an email from before you take any action on it. Just taking that extra second to think about what it is you're doing can save companies and people thousands, if not millions of dollars. So I think just trying to use common sense around what you expect to come in and out of your email box, for example, is really important.
We did that just today, Dan. Like I was sending this presentation over to you, but I couldn't email it because it was too large. And I did something that I don't normally do. I sent a Dropbox link. Before you clicked it or downloaded it, you reached out to me and said, "Hey, did you send me this Dropbox link?" And so, yeah, great OPSEC there, and great point as well.
So to try to wrap things up, like Dave said, we presented you guys with a ton of information. And as the emerging tech team, we are here as a resource to discuss these topics in more detail and discuss other topics that we maybe didn't even mention, but we wanted to give you some perspective as to what we're looking at in detail in 2020. And so as you can see, I mean, we have blog posts that we're starting to produce and share with the industry. We're updating our tech page. And one of the biggest things we're doing, like these webinars, is getting out in the industry and presenting and participating in real estate conferences and working with the folks who are practicing it day to day to understand where the pain points are and what tech they're looking at and where they're having issues. And a lot of that is collaboration, like I said, with our members, leadership. And we mentioned some of them throughout the presentation, but the larger tech companies have a significant impact on tech and the trends and where things are going. And so we continue to stay close with companies like Facebook, and make sure we understand what's going on, and if they're using augmented reality or virtual reality, how does that tie into the real estate industry? And we're working with universities as well, to know kind of what the next generation of folks entering the industry are doing and what they see. And so we would say that just in general, the collaboration and communication is really critical to making sure that people understand what these trends are and what technology may impact the real estate industry. So with that said, we'd like to wrap things up and thank everybody, and have time for a few questions.
Sure. So Dan, as this presentation has been going on, I'm not sure you're seeing it. The questions have kind of been coming in on the chat. We can kind of just jump in now and give people, as we're answering them, the opportunity to ask some more. I do see two here so far. The first one is from Jeanette from Boise. She's asking about, she saw the slide about cybersecurity, and she wants to know, like, beyond just like the generic tips, how else she can keep her business safe. I can handle this one, Dan. I think one of the tips that I think we forgot to mention was just around passwords. Personally, I use a password manager. I checked the other day. I have over 700 different websites and usernames and passwords stored, and not a single of them is duplicate. You really should not be reusing passwords anywhere. And luckily, there are some like amazing tools out there that will work with your cell phone and work with your web browser, even works with like Face ID and Touch ID. So it's no longer a pain to use these products. There's a few out there. I personally use 1Password, but definitely do your own research. LastPass is another popular one. And that reminds me as well, one last cybersecurity research tip is that I believe the Realtor benefits team is working with some cybersecurity teams on some deals. So definitely keep an eye out for that.
Dave, just to add to that, it was interesting. We were doing some internal cybersecurity training, and one note that was mentioned was those questions that say, "What is your mother's maiden name?" Although you shouldn't lie in those specific situations, they actually recommend lying about those, because people can easily find that information about what your mother's maiden name is, what street you grew up on, things like that. So they actually say to tweak those a bit. And so I think a combination of that with password apps like David mentioned, and doing two-factor authentication for critical things is a great way to start protecting yourself if you're not doing it already.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love two-factor authentication. I use it everywhere where it's possible. I've even gone to the point now where I don't allow for SMS or text-based two-factor authentication, because if people really wanted to get your information, there is a type of attack called SIM swap attacks, where people will actually hijack your phone number and then can easily do password resets to get into your systems. So what I do is non-SMS based two-factor authentication, which is using apps on your phone like Google Authenticator or Authy to provide that 6-digit code to get you in, that even if someone was able to convince Verizon that they were Dave Conroy, that they wouldn't then be able to go reset my Gmail password or reset my Facebook, because like for the if there's any executives watching this, they could be considered like targets for like these type of spear phishing. So again, we're not trying to scare people, but these are things you can do to help protect yourself. All right, next question. John from Los Angeles is asking, what should I do to, stay up on these trends? Oh, he also says, great presentation, guys. Thank you, John. Dan, you have an answer for that? How can John stay up to date?
Yeah, sure. So I mentioned some before, but our contact information is here. So we're always available to help and discuss some of these topics. I think that following our blog and then plugging in to real estate tech related websites, and these are huge topics to conferences. So I would suggest if you're going to conferences, look at the tech section and make that a priority to be a part of. I know there's a lot of at conferences, there's things on marketing and very agent kind of driven stuff, which is obviously important to your business. But you should also make sure to go to conferences as well.
I agree, Dan. Another way that I kind of force myself to stay up to date with this stuff is kind of just attending local meetups. Yeah, that's a great way to kind of learn more about like what's going on in the industry as well as kind of locally.
Yeah, and I would
Looks
just,
like we have,
sorry, I would just add as well, as our team has been developed here at NAR, every year we have an IOI conference, our Innovation Opportunity Investment Conference, which highlights a lot of the tech that's out there and what's coming. And so being a part of that, I think, is really important as well.
also NAR has other fantastic programming like the Tech Edges. That's kind of like a road tour around the country of just some of the best tech speakers and providers that often touch on a lot of this stuff, like the cybersecurity and other trends we're seeing here. Looks like we have time for one more question. This one's Colleen from Chicago. Said you had about 20 things on your list before. Beyond these 5, do you see any of these other having a major impact in 2015? Good question. Let me go back to that slide. So, again, these are topics that we're following loosely. Some of the ones, and it kind of changes, every few months on which ones we're focusing on. But a lot of these on here have been on our radar for a while, but it's just not quite ready yet. For example, 5G. This could have major impacts on like connectivity and speeds, and what type of applications we can do on our phones. This has already come so far, but some of the stuff just isn't quite ready yet. Like even the latest model iPhone doesn't come with a cellular antenna that supports 5G, and it's just some of these are just a little too green. So I think Dan and I did a pretty good job here. I know we're biased, but I think we did a pretty good job selecting the ones that we think would make the biggest impact for next year. But I could definitely see some of these, like more big data and analytics and 5G and again, the ever expansion of IoT to be on our list for trends for 2020.
And I would add too, some of these will nicely tie into the topics we're hitting right now. So for example, I mean, smart homes is on this list, which everybody's familiar with, but that ties into what Dave was talking about with like data privacy and security and how critical that's going to be and the amount of data that's out there. And it ties into a number of these other topics. So yeah, we will get to these, but it's we're trying to hit on what we think are the most critical and applicable ones to the industry.
And if you find any topics that you think we should be covering, reach out to us. We have a shared email box. We're both very active on LinkedIn. We love talking to the membership and anyone in the industry who has new and exciting ideas about tech. So I guess with that, we're out of questions and we're out of time, but I would just really like to thank everyone for tuning in today and listening to our opinions and what are going to be the biggest technology trends in real estate next year. And again, feel free to reach out. We're always happy to talk.
Yeah, thanks so much for your time.